Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that literally shapes our entire world. We are going to neutrally demystify the major economic systems running the globe today. We'll look at how these systems are designed to work in pure theory, and then we're going to examine how they actually function out there in the complex reality of today's world. Whether you're following the news, studying global markets, or just kind of curious about how wealth and resources are managed across borders, understanding this stuff is absolutely foundational.
So here's the big, overarching question we need to keep in mind today. What happens when a rigid economic theory collides with the realities of the global free market? Well, let's dive into this, because the answers we find in the real world are often quite a bit different from what you'd read in a textbook. To really grasp this, though, we first need to lay out exactly what these systems are.
Section 1. The three economic systems, the foundational pillars of modern global economics: capitalism, socialism, and communism.
Let's map these big three directly onto the real world. Under capitalism, we're looking at nations like Canada, the USA, the UK, and Australia. For socialism, we see countries like Germany and Sweden. And under communism, we have nations like China, Russia, Vietnam, Cuba, and North Korea. Keeping these real-world examples in your head is really going to anchor the theories we're about to explore. Section 2. Capitalism: Profits and Pitfalls. So at its core, capitalism is an economic system that's entirely driven by private ownership and market competition. It's a free market, right? The primary goal here is the pursuit of individual or corporate profit, where the forces of supply and demand figure out how resources get allocated. What this means on the ground is that the means of production, the machinery, the raw materials, the businesses, are controlled by private owners. Think your bankers and industrialists. They're the ones putting up the investment and taking on the financial risks, and as a result, their primary aim is to achieve a profit and expand their businesses.
But, the reality of a purely free market comes with some serious challenges. So the crucial point here is that even in a capitalist system, government regulations are absolutely required. Why? Well, without them, things can go off their rails. Governments have to intervene to stop companies from misleading consumers, to enforce worker safety, and to shut down fraudulent companies while protecting investors. On top of that, authorities have to monitor prices to prevent business monopolies. If one massive company controls a whole market, they dictate the price, right? Plus, strict rules are needed because monopolies will inevitably try to avoid paying their fair share of taxes and VAT.
Section 3. Socialism: The collective focus.
All right, socialism is a socio-economic ideology centered around the collective ownership of main industries. The fundamental objective here isn't to accumulate individual profit, it's to fulfill people's basic needs. By minimizing private ownership, the goal is to reduce economic inequality through organized wealth distribution and creating employment. In socialist setups, wealth is owned collectively, and the state uses this to cover essential services. We're talking heavily focusing on healthcare, ensuring unemployment benefits, and, in places like Sweden and Germany, having the state actually cover the costs of education too.
Let's put these side by side. On the left, we've got capitalism, strictly defined by private ownership and being profit-driven. On the right, socialism, defined by collective ownership and being needs-driven. Grasping this sharp juxtaposition between the profit motives of capitalism and the needs-driven motives of socialism is totally key to understanding the ideological divide in global economics.
Section 4. Communism: Theory versus Reality.
Okay, in pure theory, communism is an economic system aiming for a completely classless society. Under this model, properties and resources are owned communally, not individually, and distributed according to demand. In a strict communist system, private property is virtually invisible. Everything is common property. The collective owns it all, which means there's no social difference when it comes to the ownership of production.
Which leads us to a massive real-world puzzle. How do classless communist societies compete in a global free market? Seriously, think about it. If your theory dictates that private property doesn't exist and profit isn't the goal, how do you interact with a global economy driven by those exact things? How do theoretically rigid countries adapt just to survive and thrive globally?
Section 5. Modern Market Reforms: Blending Systems for Global Success.
China represents the ultimate compromise here. It is a communist country, but it operates an open, free market economy. And this brilliantly illustrates how a nation can maintain a strict communist political structure while completely bolting it onto a capitalist economic engine to become a massive player in the global economy.
Now, this didn't just happen overnight. It was a very deliberate architectural shift. Through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, Deng Xiaoping led sweeping economic reforms that opened China's labor forces to the world market. These reforms basically changed China forever and brought in a massive wave of foreign direct investment, lifting the country out of poverty. By 1992, you had major Western corporations like General Motors setting up shop in China. And by 2001, China had officially joined the World Trade Organization, cementing its spot in the global capitalist marketplace.
The real-world results of this blend are honestly staggering. Take General Motors as an example. GM started their industry in China back in 1992, right? And their initial aim was simply to take advantage of low-cost labor. However, fast forward through all these economic reforms, and today, the Chinese actually buy more cars than the Americans do. It's a stunning example of how opening up to capitalist investment transformed a communist labor force into a booming consumer class. But how exactly does a communist country successfully invite that kind of capitalist investment? Well, they have to create a highly competitive, investment-friendly environment to attract foreign direct investment. A country needs a positive image, stable law and order, and the highest security for investors. They have to guarantee basic facilities like power and gas. They offer one-stop services and set up special economic zones with highly competitive benefits. Because of this, global computer firms and chip makers flock there. But, and this is the key to the whole blended system, these investors still need to strictly follow the guidelines of the PRC. The political control remains entirely intact, even as the market opens up.
And China isn't alone in this. Vietnam, also a communist country, followed a remarkably similar path. In 1986, Vietnam launched Doi Moi, which translates to innovation. This was a massive political and economic reform that shifted the country from a strict command economy to what they call a social-oriented market economy. By opening up to foreign investment, Vietnam attracted companies from all over the world. This built Vietnam's modern economy and allowed them to join powerful international groups like ASEAN and APEC.
So, we've looked at the pure theories of capitalism, socialism, and communism, and we've seen how countries like China and Vietnam have practically rewritten the rules to survive and thrive. Which leaves us with this final thought. As global trade continues to blur the lines between these systems, will the global market eventually force all political ideologies to adopt the exact same economic rules? It's a pretty fascinating question to consider as you watch the world economy evolve. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this helped map out the complex economic systems running our world today. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.